Hey Earthlings! So, sociology can bring lots of useful insights into social movements, and it can also tell us quite a lot about social movements themselves. In 2016, I gave a talk based on sociology at VegFest in Brighton, and I thought it's kind of time to revise and update it a little bit, and so this is what this is all about, and it's ahead of the VegFest online event, which is on August the 30th and 31st, 2001. I'd like to thank VegFest manager Tim Barford for inviting me to contribute to that. So we start with one of the most basic ideas within sociology, and that's the socialization process. This starts when we're infants and it goes on all the way through our lives. It's a very important part and a very powerful part of our social being, if you like. So we're going to look at that in relation to the way that it shapes our norms and values, our attitudes and behaviours. We're going to look at that in relation to a whole bunch of things, including, of course, our relations with other animals. As you can see from this slide, there are many socializing agents. We're going to stick to the top of this picture and stay really focused on what goes on in the family. That tends to be called primary socialization, but part of our story does talk about secondary socialization, and that's when things get a little bit more complicated and indeed a little bit more contradictory, because that's when you start to get socializing agents from outside of the family. You can get them from corporations, for example, and many different things come into people's lives which influence their values and their attitudes. One of the books that I looked at during my dissertation research was called Tales from Mud Puddle Farm, aimed at children 5 and above. Mud Puddle Farm is the home of Farmer Rafferty, his wife, and a whole community of other animals. They all apparently have very happy lives, and they live in a cosy consensus. This consensus is articulated by Rafferty when he says to the other animals, "You look after me and I'll look after you." On the farm there are hens who lay eggs just for him, voluntarily, we are to assume. It's as though they are paying rent for their accommodation. The most ideologically charged and distorted message in the whole book involves the 2 cows used in the dairy industry. It is said that they let their milk down for the farmer. Presumably they can refuse to do this, and they can, if they want, hold their milk up. The cows' offspring are nowhere to be seen on the farm. There is no suggestion that the cows must have been pregnant in order to let their milk down, and there is no inquiry about where their calves are. A few years after the books were published, the illustrator made a video about his delight that his drawings and his artwork had been featured in a McDonald's Happy Meal.
Well, I've been to McDonald's and I know that they're not going to want me filming in there, but look, I want to show you this. How amazing! Look, it's I'm on a Happy Meal.
From a vegan perspective, we might think that this guy is rather disconnected, having drawn happy other animals for a children's story, and yet also happy enough to feature on a box containing the parts of dead other animals. The key to that, though, is the word happy, all wrapped up in the ideology of animal welfarism. For what is more natural than happy animals to find themselves in a Happy Meal? Another earlier book I looked at was this one, Nubbins and the Tractor. This is an interesting narrative from an animal rights point of view, in the sense that it's about animals as items of property. In fact, the narrative is about the transfer of animal property over generations. Nubbins the horse is employed on a farm, doing all the farm work until he gets replaced by a shiny new tractor, and then he's made redundant. He's going to be sold, but the farm boy, the farmer's son, asks his father to transfer the ownership of Nubbins to him, and this in fact is what's done. Then the tractor breaks down. The end of the story is supposed to be a happy tale of Nubbins delighted that he's back at work, now under new ownership as it were, with the boy working back on the farm and now re-employed and not, as it were, on the scrap heap. In this final example, Market Day, this is a board game in which the players, the farmers, go around the board collecting other animals until their farm is full. The interesting part of this is that there's no suggestion or hints to what they should do with the other animals once they've got them. In other words, there's no end use going on here. We'll come back to that theme in a few moments. So I include a few more examples in the longer video on this theme. The interesting question to ask, of course, is that these themes in these early learning books and books that children read with their parents, games they might play, how does that manifest in the real world? I've often given talks to non-vegans, and I've often tried this little experiment where I ask people to draw a farm. Just give them a blank piece of paper, no clues, and just say, can you draw me a farm? Of course, it's interesting because here is where you get the reproduction, the replication of the things that they've seen in their early books. So this is the kind of farm they draw. Of course, it's a lot simpler than this. It's just usually a line drawing. But the interesting thing is this is their mind's eye farm in several ways. It's the farm that they know about, or it's the farm that they think they know about, or it's the farm that they want to know about. And of course we have to allow for the fact that there's going to be some cultural differences here, also differences from country to country, and also between the rural and the urban, that kind of thing. There tends to be some pretty common themes in these mind's eye farm drawings. For example, they're overwhelmingly happy places. They're full of contented other animals, often with no humans present at all, but if they are, then they're all happy together and at peace. In these drawings, just like in the books, other animals are not in cages. They all have homes in which they live. And they all live in family units, parents and children together, having a fun time down on the farm. And going back to the lack of end use in the Market Day board game, there's also no suggestion of end use in these drawings. No slaughterhouse trucks, no other animals being killed, nothing like that whatsoever. So, what to make of all this? I tend to use the work of a psycholinguistic professor called Stanley Sapon for this. Really kind of interesting. He's got this idea of a two-tier value system which we socialise into children generation after generation. So Sapon is interested in the cultural transmission of social values. He's particularly interested in what we say to children about the moral status of other animals. He looks at North America and he says that children are taught, amongst other things, to be kind to other animals in this animal welfare tradition. Sapon talks about a syllabus of norms and values which are passed on generationally, and a hint to his research question is seen at the bottom of this slide here: the psychological consequences for people whose eventual empirical reality bears little resemblance to what we are taught. Sapon argues that we present a fantasy land to our children when it comes to human relations with other animals. It's a land of goodness and mercy. Everyone is friends. And when he looked at the publications as we've done, he finds the same thing. There's no kill lines there. There's no other animals chopped up to be eaten. This fantasy land is presented to our kids. And then we've got a problem, in a way. And this is Sapin's research question. Now, what indeed does happen when we get older? Our parents and carers tend to let us into the dirty little secret that the relations between ourselves and other animals are not so rosy after all. The land of goodness and mercy is in fact a land of animal use and systematic rights violations. We teach children that other animals have a status dependent on our use of them, their utility to us. We play the category game with our kids. Some other animals are now not friends, but food. Some are for our entertainment, or maybe items of clothing. Some are vermin, and they must be killed. Some must be culled, for their own good, of course. We change the rules of the game. Sapin suggests that it's not psychologically beneficial for us to have created this two-tier value system. But in some senses, we don't have any choice. We protect our children from knowledge, and then, slowly, we have to let them in on the realities of life. And the reality is that we use and we exploit and we oppress other animals routinely. Well, folks, I hope you got something valuable from that. I started off really by giving a bit of an advert for sociology. I think sociological insights can really help a social movement. Check out the International Association of Vegan Sociologists. Just look at vegan sociology on YouTube, for example, or the critical animal studies kind of pages. These are all kind of important issues. In terms of animal rights, I'd invite you also to check out the work of Tom Regan. Tom Regan is the author who started the abolitionist animal rights movement in a way with the publication of The Case for Animal Rights in 1983. It was a groundbreaking text. It's still very influential if you're into rights-based animal rights, which is, the idea that you take rights seriously. You see other animals as rights bearers, and you see that our use of other animals as rights violations. That's the animal rights position. Check it out. Also, there's a Facebook page called Tom Regan Legendary. Check that out too. And thanks for watching. See you again.